4, this is your reading for week 7. As you can see, we're starting a brand new book this week, which is called The Borrowers. It's by Mary Norton and it's illustrated by Beth and Joe Crush. I'm only going to read this section of text because I want us to discuss what the words mean, because the vocabulary is quite tricky. Because the other tasks are prediction based, I'm not going to read them because I think it gives you a bit too much help. Okay, so under the passage in the hall below there was a clock, and through the night he would hear it strike the hours. Okay, so first of all, it tells you where you are. There was a clock, and through the night he would hear it strike the hours. If a clock is striking the hours, it's making a noise. So at 1 o'clock, it will boom to tell you it's 1 o'clock, and then again at 2 o'clock, and then again at 3 o'clock. Okay, that's what it means. So on the hour, it will make a noise. It was a grandfather clock and very old. Now, a grandfather clock doesn't mean a grandfather owned it. It's the type of clock. It's a clock that looks like this. Okay, it's a big clock and it's quite tall. That's why it's called a grandfather clock. It's quite old-fashioned as well. Okay, Mr. Frith of Leighton Buzzard came each month to wind it, as his father had come before him and his great uncle before that. So, all this is telling us is that we're somewhere near Leighton Buzzard, which is a place because it's got capital letters. We don't need to worry too much about where that actually is. And we know that this man came and his father had come and his great uncle before that. So we know that he's been coming to look at the clock for a long time because 3 people in his family have come to look at it. Now, the winding, this particular type of clock is specific because you have to wind the back of it so it doesn't lose the mechanism, so the hands carry on turning. So you wind it really, really tight so the spring carries on going and so the clock carries on turning. Okay, and if you don't do it regularly, then the clock stops working. So that's the reason why it's saying came each month, because you have to go wind it every so often. For 80 years, they said, and to Mr. Frith's certain knowledge, it has not stopped, and as far as anyone could tell, for as many years before that. Okay, so we're saying that it's been there for 80 years, and probably 80 years before that, so it's probably 160 years old. It's a long time for a clock to be there, and not have been moved and not stopped. The great thing was that it must never be moved. It stood against the skirting board, and the stone flags around it had been washed so often that a little ridge, my brother said, rose up inside. Okay, the skirting board is this part of the house where just before you reach the floor, there is a skirting board. Okay, and it's all the things that's next to the wall. Okay, it's just talking about the white bit around the edge of the wall. And the stone flags, that's the floor. Okay, they had been washed so often that a little ridge rose up inside. So the bit that wasn't getting washed, let's pretend it's this bit that's not getting washed, this bit stays perfectly the same size as it always had been. And you can imagine that if the bit all the way around it had been washed and washed and washed, then it would be smaller and flatter and lower down than the bit in the middle. Because what's happened is they've gone round and round and round and they've washed it and washed it and washed it, so that the bit inside this platform is a little bit higher than all the rest of it. Okay, that's what it means. It rose up inside. It's a little bit higher than the rest of it. And under this clock, below the skirting board, there was a hole. Okay, so obviously you need to work out where the hole is. It was Pod's hole, the keep of his fortress, the entrance to his home. Okay, so this tells us that our main character, because it's his home, that's got to be talking about Pod. It's got a capital letter. It's got to be talking about him. He's the main character. So Pod, he lives there. Okay, so he lives in a hole under the clock, which tells us something about Pod. Okay, you need to try and understand that in a bit more detail. The keep of his fortress. Now, a castle would have been called a fortress in medieval times a long time ago. The keep is the bit that is the most important bit, and it's the entrance. Okay, it's a metaphor. Okay, if you feel like your home is a castle, then you feel that it's really, really safe, and you feel like you're not going to get caught, and that's the reason why it's describing it as a castle. Okay, not that his home was anywhere near the clock, far from it, as you might say. So his home is actually quite a long way from the clock. Now, we don't know what that means. We're going to have to read on to find out, but it's not right underneath the clock. There were yards of dark and dusty passageway, with wooden doors between the joists, and metal gates against the mice. Now let's think of that. So you've got the clock, and then you've got passageway underneath that he walks along with wooden doors between the joists. Now joists are the things that hold up your floor. Okay, they're the wooden bits that's in between your floor. So you can imagine that Pod's walking in between these, and there must be holes in them. Okay, and he's saying there's wooden doors between the joists. So you need to think about how you might show that. And there were metal gates against the mice. You might think about why you would need a gate against mice under the floor. Okay. Pod used all kinds of things for these gates. A flat leaf of a folding cheese grater, the hinged lid of a small cash box, squares of pierced zinc from an old meat safe, a wire fly swatter. Okay. If we look at those 4 items, it tells you something about when this was set and when it was written. Okay. Because we still have cheese graters, okay, and you might recognise one in your house. We still have fly swatters, but not necessarily ones that look like that. Small cash boxes, though, and meat safes are not necessarily things we might have in our house. So you might need to think about what we have now and then what that tells you about when it is. Just to help you then, this would have been a door, okay, this bit would have been a gate against the mice. Also, the wire of the wire fly swatter. So think of what that would have been like. The hinged lid, so you're talking about just the lid of this cash box. And you're talking about squares of pierced zinc. Now zinc is a metal, and that's the bit out of the meat safe. Okay? Can you think of what it would mean? Okay. Now your job is to visualize this as easily as you can. So draw a picture to show what it means. Try and think about, do you need 1 picture? Do you need 2? How are you going to show it to show that you really understand? You need to use labels from the text. So you'd have your picture in the middle of this box, and then you would have labels out to show what it would mean. Okay? Good luck. You can do it.